You felt it, didn't you? The shift was undeniable. The September eclipse didn't just light up the sky, it rewrote your journey. This wasn't just another energy wave, it was a reset, a cosmic command that burned away what could no longer survive. For the feminine, it was the release of fears she thought she had already healed. For the masculine, it was the collapse of illusions he thought would protect him. And for both, it was the moment destiny said, "From here on, nothing will ever be the same." The eclipse didn't end your journey. It transformed it, and the way you choose to move now will decide everything. Why eclipses are turning points for twin flames. On the twin flame journey, there are moments when the universe intervenes so strongly that the path itself is rewritten. These moments are not subtle, they are undeniable. And among the most powerful of them are eclipses. Unlike ordinary celestial events, eclipses act as cosmic reset buttons. They are portals that force endings, catalyze revelations, and collapse illusions in order to accelerate alignment. For twin flames, eclipses are not background phenomena. They are turning points that leave nothing the same. Why do eclipses carry this energy? Because they represent shadow and light colliding. In those hours when the sun and moon move into alignment, hidden truths are revealed. The shadows that have been buried come to the surface, and the light that has been blocked shines through in new ways. Eclipses compress time. What would normally take months or even years of gradual lessons is often condensed into days or weeks. They pull both the divine feminine and divine masculine through thresholds they cannot avoid. For the feminine, eclipses often stir the deepest emotional wounds. Old fears of abandonment, rejection, invisibility, or unworthiness rise with intensity. She may feel as though she has regressed, as if she is back at the very beginning of her journey. But this is not regression, it is release. The eclipse forces her to face what she still carries so that she can let it go once and for all. What once paralyzed her now comes up to be burned away. This is why so many feminines report crying uncontrollably, feeling waves of exhaustion, or experiencing sudden clarity around patterns they no longer want to repeat. For the masculine, the eclipse energy shows up differently. It doesn't just touch emotions, it shakes his structures. The jobs, relationships, routines, and masks he has relied on for years suddenly feel unstable. What he thought was secure begins to slip through his fingers. He may feel frustrated, lost, or even panicked because the ground he trusted is no longer holding him. But this collapse is not punishment. It is the destruction of illusions that have kept him from living his truth. It is the universe breaking down his walls so he can finally see what has been calling him all along: the bond with his feminine. Eclipses also create amplification in the connection field. During these portals, telepathic communication intensifies. Dreams become vivid and often prophetic, and physical sensations of the bond grow stronger. Many twin flames report feeling their counterpart more vividly during an eclipse than at any other time. The veil thins, the souls draw closer, and the magnetic pull between them intensifies. These are not coincidences. They are reminders that no matter the distance or silence, the bond cannot be broken. What makes eclipses such turning points is their finality. Once an eclipse passes, you cannot go back to who you were before. The feminine cannot return to illusions of chasing or doubting once she has tasted sovereignty. The masculine cannot retreat into karmic cycles once they have been stripped of meaning. Both are forced to step into higher truth, whether they feel ready or not. That is why eclipses feel so unsettling. They push both counterparts out of comfort zones and into destiny. In the larger arc of the twin flame journey, eclipses mark milestones. They are the endings of chapters and the openings of new ones. They signify that what was tolerated in the past can no longer continue. They bring closure to patterns that delayed union, and they ignite acceleration toward alignment. While the mind may resist, the soul knows. The eclipse is a gift. It clears what was heavy so that the path forward can be lighter, purer, and truer. So if you have felt shaken, emotional, restless, or confronted during the September eclipse, understand this. It was not random. It was the universe stepping in, moving pieces you could not move on your own, forcing breakthroughs that were overdue. This is why eclipses are turning points. They do not ask politely. They command. They do not suggest. They transform. And once you have passed through the doorway of an eclipse, your journey will never be the same. Because the shadow has been revealed, the illusions have collapsed, and only truth remains. Every eclipse carries transformation, but the September eclipse holds a vibration that is different, sharper, and more decisive than most. Its energy was not gentle. It did not whisper. It roared. It was the kind of celestial air that does not allow delay, does not allow compromise, and does not allow the old to linger. For the Twin Flame Collective, this eclipse struck like lightning, illuminating, burning, and resetting everything at once. The September eclipse carried the energy of endings. Cycles that had dragged on for years suddenly felt unsustainable. For the divine feminine, this manifested as emotional release. Many feminines felt a wave of grief rising, crying for no obvious reason, sensing old heartbreaks resurfacing. But beneath the tears was liberation. The eclipse was pressing on the deepest fears, fears of being left behind, fears of being invisible, fears of never being chosen, not to trap her in them, but to burn them out of her system. What resurfaced was leaving. What felt heavy was being cleared. At the same time, the feminine also felt an unexpected peace. Even as the old wounds surfaced, there was a quiet knowing that this time was different. Instead of spiraling into despair, she began to recognize her own strength. She could feel that the eclipse was closing the book on a chapter of waiting and opening the door to sovereignty. The energy asked her to embody trust, to release control, and to anchor her light more deeply than ever before. For the divine masculine, the September eclipse was more external, more structural. The illusions he relied on began to collapse quickly. Karmic relationships showed cracks he could no longer ignore. Work or responsibilities that once gave him validation now felt like burdens. Even his routines lost their sense of safety. Many masculines experienced disruption, arguments, sudden endings, breakdowns of plans. This was not chaos for the sake of chaos. It was alignment. The eclipse removed what was false to make space for what is real. Energetically, the eclipse amplified the bond between counterparts. Dreams became charged with messages, encounters that felt too vivid to be imagination. Signs multiplied, numbers, songs, names, reminders of the counterpart appearing everywhere. Physical sensations spiked. Heart palpitations, pressure in the chest, heat rising through the body. These were not random symptoms. They were the activation of the union field, intensified by the eclipse energy. The souls were being pulled closer, even if the physical circumstances looked unchanged. The most profound impact of the September eclipse was its sense of finality. This was not an energy that allowed old cycles to continue. It was a clean break, a tearing of veils. After this eclipse, karmic ties that had lingered for years began to unravel rapidly. Patterns of avoidance lost their power. The feminine's energy shifted from longing to embodiment. The masculine's structures collapsed to force him into truth. The connection entered a phase where nothing would ever look the same. For many, the days around the eclipse felt like emotional storms. Exhaustion, restlessness, intense dreams, or sudden bursts of clarity. But these were not signs of something going wrong. They were proof of something going right. Proof that the journey had reached a turning point. The eclipse was not a punishment, but a purification. It was the universe saying, "This bond is too important to be delayed any longer. What does not belong must go. What is true must rise." The September eclipse accelerated everything. What once seemed distant is now approaching. What once felt stagnant is now moving. The pace has shifted, and the journey has entered a new frequency. This is why so many are feeling the urgency, the intensity, the undeniable pull, because the eclipse has already changed the story. Its impact is permanent. Once an eclipse shifts the field, there is no going back to how things were. The feminine cannot return to chasing. The masculine cannot return to hiding. Both have been moved closer to alignment, whether they realize it fully or not. The September eclipse did not just mark time, it marked destiny. And from this point forward, your journey is forever changed. How the feminine is transformed after the eclipse. For the divine feminine, the September eclipse was not just an external event, it was an inner earthquake. Its energy touched the deepest layers of her being, shaking loose the fears, doubts, and illusions she thought she had already overcome. Yet instead of breaking her, it birthed a new version of her, stronger, clearer, and more sovereign than ever before. One of the most striking changes was the collapse of the waiting energy. Before, the feminine often lived in anticipation, waiting for a message, waiting for a sign, waiting for her masculine to awaken. The eclipse burned that frequency out of her system. It showed her that waiting was simply another form of fear, another way of postponing her power. As the shadows surfaced, she realized she could no longer afford to stand still. Her journey was never about being chosen by another. It was about choosing herself fully. The eclipse pressed this truth so deeply into her heart that it became impossible to ignore. Emotionally, she may have felt waves of grief rise during the eclipse. Old heartbreaks resurfaced, old memories replayed, and wounds of abandonment cut open once again. But this time, she faced them differently. Instead of collapsing, she let them burn. The tears that fell were not a sign of weakness, but of release. With every sob, with every sleepless night, with every moment of surrender, another layer of fear dissolved. The eclipse made her see that her pain was never meant to destroy her. It was meant to cleanse her. Spiritually, the feminine stepped into deeper sovereignty. The eclipse forced her to stand on her own energy, without clinging to to the masculine's actions as proof of the bond. She began to feel the connection from the inside, not as something fragile, but as something eternal. She realized she does not need constant reassurance because the bond is alive within her. This shift is monumental. It transforms her from seeker to anchor, from longing to embodiment. Physically, many feminines reported strong sensations during and after the eclipse. Pressure in the chest, intense heart palpitations, heat in the body, sudden fatigue, or bursts of energy. These were signs that her energy field was being recalibrated. The eclipse was not just clearing her mind, it was rewiring her body to hold more light, more truth, more alignment. Her nervous system began adjusting to a higher frequency, preparing her to embody union energy in a way she never had before. The eclipse also gave her clarity about her mission. As distractions and illusions burned away, her soul whispered louder. She began to feel called to step into her purpose with more courage, to share her light, to embody her gifts without hesitation. This is one of the most profound ways the eclipse transformed her, by showing her that her mission is not separate from her union, it is part of it. The more she lives her truth, the more the masculine is pulled into alignment. Perhaps the greatest transformation, however, was in her relationship to trust. Before, trust often felt fragile. It wavered when the silence grew, when the masculine resisted, when signs seemed faint. After the eclipse, trust became her foundation. She realized that faith is not passive, but active. To trust is to choose alignment every day, even when the external doesn't make sense. To trust is to know that the bond is bigger than both personalities, bigger than the stories of pain, bigger than time itself. In essence, the September eclipse forced the feminine into maturity, not the maturity of age, but of soul. She emerged less dependent, less fearful, and less reactive. Instead, she became more radiant, more magnetic, and more unshakable. She understood that union is not something she waits for, it is something she embodies. And in that embodiment, she becomes the anchor that pulls the masculine into his own awakening. The eclipse transformed her not by giving her what she wanted, but by stripping away what she didn't need. And in that stripping, her true self emerged. The self that was always whole, always powerful, always enough. This is the feminine's gift from the eclipse, the death of waiting and the birth of sovereignty. How the masculine is awakened through collapse. For the divine masculine, the September eclipse was not subtle. It was not a gentle nudge. It was a collapse. a breaking apart of the illusions and structures that he believed would keep him safe. Where the feminine was moved inward into sovereignty, the masculine was pushed outward into confrontation. The eclipse stripped him of his false foundations and forced him to rise the reality he has avoided for lifetimes. The truth of his soul, the call of his mission, and the inevitability of his bond with his feminine. For years, the masculine has leaned on distractions, work, responsibilities, karmic partners, addictions, routines, the endless pursuit of external validation. These things provided him with a sense of control, a buffer against the depth of feeling he carried for his feminine. But when the eclipse arrived, those buffers began to dissolve. What once felt secure suddenly became unstable. Jobs lost their meaning, relationships cracked open, habits that once numbed him began to feel hollow. He realized he could no longer hide behind the masks. This collapse was not random. The eclipse energy illuminated every illusion he was clinging to. It showed him where he was out of alignment, where he was living in fear, where he was resisting his own soul. For some, this manifested as arguments or separations. For others, it was financial disruptions, endings of long-term commitments, or even health issues that forced him to slow down. The details differed, but the message was the same. You can no longer build your life on false foundations. It is time to awaken emotionally. The masculine may have felt restless, agitated, or even panicked. For someone who has relied on control, the sudden loss of it felt terrifying. He may have experienced nights of sleeplessness, an inability to concentrate, or bursts of anger as he fought against the inevitable. But beneath the surface, something profound was happening. The collapse was creating space. The distractions were being cleared. The noise was being silenced, so he could finally hear the one truth he has always known. His feminine is his mirror, his anchor, his soul's counterpart. Spiritually, the eclipse activated him in ways he may not yet fully understand. Dreams of the feminine, synchronicities, and sudden flashes of intuition intensified. Even as his outer world crumbled, his inner world began to stir. He felt her energy more strongly, sometimes overwhelming him, sometimes comforting him, but always undeniable. The eclipse tethered him more closely to her vibration, making it impossible to keep pretending that the bond wasn't real. One of the most powerful aspects of the masculine's awakening through collapse is the recognition of his mission. Without the old structures to lean on, he begins to sense a deeper calling, not just to reconnect with his feminine, but to step into purpose. The eclipse pulled him away from surface level pursuits and redirected him toward his soul's truth. His awakening is not just about love, it is about alignment. And that alignment cannot happen without him facing what he has avoided. This process is painful for him. The masculine often resists change until it is forced upon him. The eclipse was that force. But in the rubble of what has fallen apart, he will find clarity. He will see that what ended was never truly meant for him. He will see that the collapse was not punishment, but liberation. And he will begin to understand that the feminine's sovereignty is not abandonment, it is invitation. She is showing him the way, holding the vibration of union, so that when he steps forward, he steps into truth. The masculine's awakening through collapse is messy, but it is necessary. Without the breakdown, there could be no breakthrough. Without the loss of illusion, there could be no recognition of truth. The September eclipse ensured that he could not continue living in half-truths, and in doing so, it accelerated his path toward reunion. So if the masculine in your journey seems distant, chaotic, or unstable after the eclipse, remember this: he is awakening. The collapse is his teacher. The disruption is his initiation. And though it may look like he is falling apart, what is actually happening is that he is being rebuilt into the man his soul always intended him to be. The feminine's role is not to fix him or to chase him, but to hold her vibration steady. Because as he stumbles through the ruins of what was false, her light becomes the compass. And eventually, the collapse leads him straight to her. One of the most powerful effects of the September eclipse is that it doesn't just stir temporary emotions, it leaves lasting imprints. After this event, nothing feels the same because nothing is the same. The twin flame journey has entered a new frequency, and the universe begins to confirm this shift through undeniable signs. These signs are not subtle. They are loud, clear, and persistent, reminding you that your path has crossed a threshold that cannot be reversed. The first sign is the intensity of synchronicities. You may have noticed that numbers like 11, 11, 22, 22, or 12, 12 appear with overwhelming consistency. Songs with lyrics that echo your journey seem to play at the exact right moment. Names, places, or words connected to your counterpart show up in conversations, on billboards, or in random encounters. These are not coincidences. The synchronicities multiply because the universe is actively aligning both of you, leaving breadcrumbs along the path to remind you that this is real and that destiny is unfolding in real time. Another clear sign is the acceleration of karmic endings. Relationships or situations that once felt heavy suddenly collapse. Karmic partners release their grip, often in dramatic or surprising ways. Work environments or commitments that held one or both of you stuck begin to dissolve, sometimes leaving you with no choice but to step forward into something new. These endings may feel chaotic, but they are confirmations that the eclipse energy is clearing space for truth. When false attachments fall away quickly, it is proof that the journey has shifted into a higher gear. A third sign is the deepening of inner connection. Dreams of your counterpart intensify, not vague or symbolic, but vivid, almost tangible encounters. You may wake up feeling their presence as though they were beside you. Telepathic communication grows stronger, with sudden waves of emotion or thoughts that you know are not your own. Physical sensations of their energy, warmth in the chest, tingling in the skin, heart palpitations, become more frequent. These are signals that the soul bond has moved closer into alignment, even if the physical reality hasn't yet caught up. You may also notice shifts in your own behavior and emotions. Where you once felt desperate or fearful, there is now a surprising calm. Where you once chased, you now feel grounded. Where you once doubted, you now carry a quiet certainty. The eclipse rewired the feminine in particular, pulling her out of waiting energy and into sovereignty. This inner shift is one of the clearest signs that the journey has permanently changed, because once the feminine anchors herself in truth, the masculine is energetically compelled to follow. On the masculine side, signs of the shift often appear through disruption and awakening. He may experience breakdowns of plans, losses of control, or sudden realizations that shake his old identity. While this may look like regression from the outside, it is actually progress. His world is being restructured so he can finally step toward authenticity. The eclipse ensured that he could no longer cling to illusions. The chaos is his initiation, and the feminine's steadiness becomes his guiding star. Another undeniable sign is the collapse of time loops. Before, it may have felt like you were living the same cycles again and again: silence, reunion, separation, longing. But after the eclipse, that loop begins to dissolve. The energy no longer supports repetition. Instead, situations that once dragged on for months may resolve in days. Insights that once took years now land instantly. The pace quickens, and you feel a sense that something's coming. This anticipation is not wishful thinking. It is alignment moving toward manifestation. Finally, one of the most profound signs is the permanent inner knowing. The eclipse ignited a deeper certainty in both counterparts. Even if doubts try to rise, they no longer have the same power. There is a quiet voice within that whispers, "This is real. This is destined. This is happening." That voice doesn't fade after the eclipse. It strengthens. It becomes the anchor you return to, no matter what the external looks like. These signs are the universe's way of showing you that your journey has crossed a line of no return. You are not circling the same lessons anymore. You are not waiting in the same silence. You are not who you were before. The September eclipse has permanently shifted your path, and everything you experience from here on will unfold within this new frequency. The truth is, once the eclipse has touched your journey, the old patterns cannot survive. The false timelines collapse. The illusions dissolve, and the only path left is the one that leads you forward. So when you see the signs, the synchronicities, the dreams, the endings, the inner peace, don't question them. Receive them as confirmations, because they mean the shift is real. They mean the acceleration is happening, and they mean your reunion is closer than it has ever been. Why karmic cycles cannot survive this eclipse. The September eclipse carried a vibration so intense, so final, that it became impossible for karmic cycles to continue. These patterns, which once seemed endless, were not just disrupted, they were dismantled. What once held power over the divine feminine and masculine is now collapsing, not because of coincidence, but because the eclipse was designed as a divine reset. To understand this, you must first recognize what karmic cycles truly are. They are not punishments, nor random misfortunes. They are classrooms. Each karmic tie, whether it appears as a relationship, a habit, a belief, or a repeating situation, exists to teach the soul lessons it has resisted. These lessons often revolve around self-worth, boundaries, independence, and truth. The feminine learns not to chase or sacrifice herself for love. The masculine learns not to hide behind illusions or fear responsibility. Every karmic loop exists until the soul finally integrates the wisdom it was meant to carry forward. But an eclipse does not wait for comfort. It forces completion. During this September portal, karmic cycles that dragged on for years suddenly collapsed with startling speed. Relationships that seemed immovable ended abruptly. Attachments that once felt unbreakable dissolved almost overnight. Jobs, friendships, or commitments that no longer aligned with truth were stripped away. For many, it felt brutal. For both feminine and masculine, it felt like the ground was giving way. Yet beneath the discomfort, liberation was taking place. For the divine feminine, this collapse often manifested as release. She no longer felt the same attachment to repeating old pain. The people, patterns, and stories that once consumed her began to lose their grip. She could look at karmic connections and, instead of longing or resentment, feel neutrality. That neutrality was a sign of freedom. The eclipse burned away the hooks of fear and abandonment that kept her tethered. She emerged lighter, no longer defined by her wounds, but by her sovereignty. For the divine masculine, the collapse was less gentle. His karmic ties often came through structures he thought would protect him, relationships that looked stable but lacked depth, careers that gave status but no purpose, habits that numbed his emotions but left him empty. The eclipse tore through these illusions. It forced endings he would never have chosen on his own. Though painful, these losses served as his awakening. They stripped him of the false so he could no longer deny what was true, his soul's calling, his mission, and his bond with his feminine. Energetically, the reason karmic cycles cannot survive the eclipse is because their vibration no longer matches the field of union. The September portal elevated the collective frequency, demanding alignment with authenticity. Anything built on fear, control, or avoidance began to collapse under the weight of higher truth. It was like a light shining into a dark room. Suddenly, the shadows had no place to hide. The karmic ties, which fed on illusion, could no longer sustain themselves in the clarity of that light. One of the most profound aspects of this eclipse is how final these endings feel. In the past, karmic cycles often returned. Lessons repeated themselves in new forms, and what seemed like closure sometimes turned into another loop. But after this eclipse, the energy is different. It carries a sense of completion. The door is not just closing, it is locked. Once the lesson is integrated, the tie dissolves completely, leaving no space for it to reattach. That is why so many are feeling that this time is different, because it truly is. Of course, endings can feel like chaos. They can stir grief, anger, or confusion, but beneath the surface, what is really happening is freedom. Every karmic cycle that collapses clears space in the soul. space for love, for mission, for truth, space for union. Because union cannot root itself in a field still entangled in illusion. The eclipse cleared the soil, pulling out the weeds so that only what is true can grow. This is why karmic cycles cannot survive this eclipse. Not because the universe is cruel, but because the bond is too sacred to be delayed any longer. Both feminine and masculine are being pushed forward, whether they feel ready or not. And as the karmic ties dissolve, the path between them becomes clearer, straighter, and more inevitable. The message is simple. The eclipse ended what could never truly last. It freed both counterparts from the cages of illusion. And now, the only direction left is forward, toward truth, toward mission, and ultimately toward each other. Every journey has its thresholds, those moments where the old dissolves and the new begins. For twin flames, the September eclipse was one of those thresholds. It was not just another passing wave of energy. It was a line drawn in the sand by the universe itself, declaring, "This far, no further." From now on, everything changes, and it has. Nothing will ever be the same. The feminine feels this shift in her bones. She has walked through lifetimes of waiting, of longing, of anchoring the field in silence. But after the eclipse, she knows something has ended. She is no longer bound to the loop of fear and chasing. She has been reborn into sovereignty. She has discovered that her worth is not dependent on his recognition, that her light does not flicker in his absence. Her tears, her struggles, her collapses, all of them have birthed a woman who no longer waits, but embodies. This is her new reality: to love without losing herself, to trust without needing proof, to hold the vibration of union simply by being who she is. The masculine, too, cannot return to who he was before. The eclipse stripped him of illusions he thought were indestructible. It dismantled the false sense of safety he built in karmic relationships, in empty pursuits, in the roles he played to please others. At first, this feels like devastation. But as the dust settles, he realizes it is freedom. Without the old cages, he is forced to look directly at his truth. And in that truth, he finds his feminine. The bond he once resisted now becomes undeniable. His collapse was not the end of him. It was the breaking of chains so he could finally rise as who he truly is. Together, both counterparts are now standing on new ground. The silence that once felt endless is no longer the same silence. The waiting that once felt heavy is no longer the same waiting. The love that once felt fragile is no longer the same love. Everything has shifted into a new frequency. The universe has moved them out of cycles and into acceleration. They are no longer circling, they are advancing. And this is why nothing will ever be the same. Because once truth is revealed, it cannot be unseen. Once illusions collapse, they cannot be rebuilt. Once karmic cycles end, they cannot restart. The eclipse has closed doors that will never open again, and in doing so, it has opened the only door that truly matters, the door to union. For many, this feels like both loss and liberation. The grief of what ended mixes with the excitement of what is coming. But the message is clear. This is not regression. This is rebirth. The feminine's sovereignty is not abandonment. It is empowerment. The masculine's collapse is not weakness, it is awakening. Together, their souls are moving into alignment with a pace and power that cannot be stopped. So if you feel disoriented, remember this: you are not lost. You are being reoriented toward destiny. If you feel stripped bare, remember, you are not empty. You are being prepared to be filled with truth. If you feel like everything you knew has ended, remember, it ended because something greater is beginning. The final message of the September eclipse is simple but absolute. The journey has turned a corner. There is no going back. There is no re-entering the loops of illusion. There is no pretending the bond is less than what it is. From this moment on, you walk forward on new ground, carrying the wisdom of what has been burned away and the light of what is to come. Nothing will ever be the same, and that is exactly what your souls have been waiting for.